Well, we have a fascinating program today, and it's given by one of our very own,
So,
because Margaret is one of our founding members, and she's been with the village ever since its inception and before. I think you were very involved in the creation of it. Usually we have outsiders, so it's very special today to have someone from within talking to us, and she's very qualified. I mean, she has been in Hyde Park a long time. She has a degree in human development, a graduate degree, as well as has worked in gerontology. So she knows older people, she understands. I think she just has a great deal to offer us. So I think we'll just let her get started. And because I hope at the end we have some time for some questions.
oh, I hope so.
I hope so. All right. So, all
Well,
right. Please go ahead.
let's see. All right, we're going to talk about sex and relationships in later life. If I can get my slides to change. Oh, okay. Well, so why am I here? I mean, I'm doing the program on the end of life planning too, so I'm talking about death, but today I'm going to talk about life and really making the most of whatever years we have. As you mentioned, I have this formal education in human development, which was a very unusual program when it was initiated because they said we have to look at development from this whole variety of perspectives. So we studied genetics, biological functioning, psychological functioning, the social status, and all the sociological perspectives. And we have to do this in cross-cultural perspectives. So, and it's really lifespan development is what I took. So you start with sperm and you end with the worm. So it's a lot of different perspectives. It took me probably 10 or 20 years to kind of put them together into any kind of real understanding of what was going on. Within that whole lifespan, I found the adult years were the most fascinating to me and the least well studied. So I actually became a gerontologist long, long ago when I was a very young woman. And so I've been always studying, though, adult development and aging in the context of earlier experiences, because every time I go to try to figure out what's happening in midlife or later life, I feel, well, I really have to go back and find out what happened earlier to make any sense of it. So I like that. One of the other qualifications that I haven't been able to do too much about, I worked with a very interesting experimental program at the Northwestern Medical School. And it was initiated actually in Minnesota. And they thought, people need to know more about sexuality and their own sexuality than they do. And in particular, physicians get almost no training in sexual functioning, sexuality, even though that's a very important part of their patients' lives. Most of them don't get much education and they don't know what to do with it. So Northwestern agreed to run these workshops. They called them eventually sexual attitude recognition workshops. And they were very intensive 2-day workshops. And one of the first things happened when you got in was a fuckorama. And they had a whole wall full of pornography films. And you sat and looked at them. We started out with 45 minutes, decided that was more than we really needed. And so cut that down. But after you look at them, then you break up into small groups and say, what is it that you really were fascinated by? What scenes you couldn't look at because they were just too painful for whatever reason. And it was a quick way of breaking the barriers about talking about sex, because there it is up on the wall before you. And it's the first step in saying, what are your own real feelings about sexual possibilities? And that program started out actually being labeled sexual attitude reconstruction. And they decided that, no, this is not the point. We just want people to understand at least their own attitudes. And then they could think about somebody else's. Somebody else has also a complex history of developing their senses about what sexuality, what it means. And then I've also done my own research into sexuality. I wrote 2 books that included sections on sexuality. My first one, Growing Older, What You Need to Know About Aging, was really intended to be for young adults. It's a heavily edited book and includes, actually, I still think it's a good book, but it's no longer in print. And the next book I did was a textbook on adult development and aging when there weren't any. And that includes, of course, that material. So I read everybody else's research. And then I had my own research project. It was actually a 2-generation project of young adult children and their middle-aged parents. I focused on the middle-aged parents, and we had 134 wives, 107 husbands that we interviewed. And within that, I did most of my analyses were on their marriage relationships, and which included, of course, their sexuality, and as well as how they felt about themselves as men or women, the gender studies kind of stuff. We also studied, there are other people who studied their young adult kids and their children's children. And my latest thing, and the reason that I'm here now is because I was asked to prepare a book chapter, Falling in Love in Later Life. And I did it. I did a lot of research reading other research that I hadn't done for quite a while since I've been retired. And that was published, and a number of people in the village read it and said I should do something more. So this is the more. And in that, and some of those, I've referenced these, and they're listed how you can get a hold of them at the end of the talk here. And I'd be happy to send you a copy of anything that I have. And my own personal experiences, I grew up in Iowa in the 1950s. So I'm of that cohort. I'm now 85. And we grew up with a certain set of expectations about what it meant to be, what sex was, and what it meant, and who you could share it with, and what you could do with it. I was in a very long relationship with a man that I went to high school with, and we were married for 54 years, and then he died. So I was single for a few years, and I am now repartnered. So I've had not all the experiences possible, I know. I've never been divorced, and actually I've never gone online to go dating either. So my experiences are limited, but you can share yours. So when we're talking about sex, what are we talking about? Because we really could be talking about a lot of different things. I'm really going to focus here on those special pleasures derived from actions that stimulate various erogenous zones. And you know what they are. The skin is the most important one, and we feel good when we're touched, most people. And our breasts, nipples have special feelings of pleasure, which makes like nursing a real pleasure for some women. And we know that the penis and the clitoris, which are pretty equivalent in terms of developmental history, are richly endowed with special nerve endings. The vagina is pretty sensitive and not certainly nearly as much as the clitoris, but it's not bad. And the anus for many people is a source of feelings and for many people pleasure. And the most important sexual organ of all is the brain, because that's where we have our memories and of both pleasure and displeasure. And we have also our imagination. So we can take what little fragments of experience we've had and turn it into something new and different and exciting. That definitely falls under the category of sexuality. So those are the ones we're talking about. We're really, and how our desire to experience very different kinds of pleasure or to avoid certain kinds of stimulation. How does that shape our interactions with other people and our feelings about ourselves too? So I'm not really focusing here on sex as chromosomes, hormones, social roles, social status, gender identity, sexual orientation, even though they're all important and they all affect sexual pleasure and sexual behavior. But that's like, 5 talks. I can't do it in just one session. So that's what we'll be focusing on here. Who cares? Does anybody really care about sex and older people? Well, yes, at least some people do. We know that some of you do, and because you're here. And there is a fairly recent survey, national poll, that said 67% of older adults, but they're talking just 65 to 80, are interested in sex. And so I'm not even in that group, but I'm still interested in sex. And of those, a little less than half of them are so-called sexually active in the last year. And you have to really look closely at each study to see how they've defined sexually active. But at least 40% of the people said they were doing something they considered sexual. And of those, there were a number of people who have a partner. We know we often associate later life with not having a partner, but a lot of people do. But only a little more than half of them are sexually active. So just because you're in a partnership or have a partner doesn't mean it's a sexual partnership. And that's very important to recognize and to take account of. If you do have a partner, or even if you don't, but if you're having sex and feeling satisfied about it, there really are a lot of demonstrated benefits. There's been a great deal of research on this. And for one thing, most of those, they are associated with higher self-esteem. You feel more attractive. Somebody wants to have sex with you. There's a higher quality of life generally. People feel younger. They're less likely to feel they're kind of aging out of everything that's enjoyable. If you're having some kind of sexual activity at one age, you're more likely to have it at the next age. And that's your sexual active life expectancy. So people who are still enjoying it at 85 are more likely to be doing it at 90 and 95 if they live so long. And that is associated with increased intimacy and attraction in a relationship and more stability in the relationship. And, sexuality and sexual satisfaction has long been considered a relational glue. And that finding holds up pretty well. And it's now been associated with better physical health and better mental health, less depression. It's a stress reliever, less sense of loneliness, more sense of intimacy. Sex is also a sense of humor, a source of humor so at my age, getting any means sleep. And I believe in having sex on the first date. My age, there may not be a second one. And for a good time, call somebody younger. And here's one. A 90-year-old man announces his intention to marry a woman of 30. He's persuaded to have a medical exam first. Everyone tells me I need a checkup to see if I'm fit, he says to the doctor. Okay, says the medic, let me see your sex organs. So the old guy sticks out his tongue and his middle finger. So that's some of the humor, and there's lots more out there. And in my senior support group, which means weekly, we have one of our members who brings in a good sex joke every week. But I couldn't include them all here. The other thing, the source of inspiration for me is a program, a sexuality education program called Our Whole Lives, OWL. This was the other OWL. I was involved with the Older Women's League. So for a while, I was very confused. What are they talking about? The OWL program will meet. No, it won't. Well, this is Our Whole Lives, a sexuality education program for all ages. And it was developed by the Unitarian Universalist Association and the United Church of Christ. And they have separate programs for children, youth, adults, and they have one for older adults. And I had heard about it vaguely. Then I went and bought it, read through it. And usually the older adult program has like 14 different workshops that they recommend and have all laid out. And it's usually led by trade leaders. And so it's not the SAR, the sexual attitude recognition workshops. It's something much more encompassing and much more deliberative in how they approach the various relevant issues. And the assumptions of that program for older adults, I thought were very important. If I can get my slides to change, I will show you what they are. Okay, here's the assumptions that they make. For one thing, they assume that all humans are sexual beings. And that means not just young and attractive human beings, but everybody. That's whether you have a disability or what disabilities you have, how attractive or unattractive you are on the current prevailing social scale, no matter what your relationship status is, your social status, none of that counts. Every person is a sexual being. And furthermore, that people are sexual from the time they're born until they die. It's not something that just happens at puberty, and it's not something that wears out, runs out, disappears for most people. And we know that you're really sexual and sensual when you're born. You just have to look at an infant and that kind of total pleasure in being touched, in being embraced, in nursing or sucking, in gazing on interesting sights. They're just little organs of sensuality. And that gets sort of modified and shaped up as you get older. And we know that people, I saw one of my friends as he was dying. I happened to be in the hospital when he was there, and he was clutching his penis, even though he was barely aware of what was going on, but that was still a source of comfort for him. And sexuality is a really positive part of the human experience, not something to be tamed and dismissed and ignored as far as possible, but something that's really positive. That's the assumption of this program. It's not of every program. And sexuality, we know, includes a whole lot more than just sexual behavior of what we think of standardly as sexual behavior. It includes a lot of values, includes how we establish intimacy, includes obviously all our reproductive health and behavior, but it includes our whole sense of gender identity. What does it mean to be born or labeled the sex group that we're in? We know that sex groups are even not very accurate. because people are on a continuum in terms of what we consider masculine, feminine, male, female, so that there's a lot of in-between categories that we don't think about. So sexuality is a very complex topic of its own. And the assumption is also it's really natural to express sexual feelings, which everybody has, in a variety of ways. And that sort of is what it means to understand how you expressing them, how you would like to express them, how you would definitely not want to express them. And that all goes into understanding the variety of behaviors that we actually experience and observe. And people engage in healthy sexual behavior for a lot of reasons. Maybe to express caring and love, maybe to experience intimacy and connection with another, to share pleasure. Bringing new life into the world is mostly not our concern anymore, if it ever was, and mostly just to have fun and relax. And that set of assumptions is actually very important. I taught a course on sexuality in later life, probably 30, 40 years ago. And I was asked to present this workshop down south somewhere. And I showed a film that I had discovered of an really older, but a really old couple having sex. And it was clear that they were not married. And they weren't actually in a relationship. They were just having sex and showing how to do it, and expressing and sharing with the audience how much fun it was and how good it felt. And my class was really upset. They said, but there was nothing in there about loving and commitment, and they were in a legal relationship, and how dare you show us this? Well, I didn't know any better. I thought it was a really great film myself, and it was very unusual. But I think now in this group, in this context, with the OWL program, we can do that. But I don't know where the film is. And we also recognize in this whole program that sexuality in our society, at least, is damaged by violence, exploitation, dishonesty, abuse of power, treating people as objects. We see that. There's plenty of that in the news every day. So that's not the sexuality that we're really talking about here. I'm talking about something much more positive. Now, one of the most important concepts, I think, that came out of my musings and research was this notion of sexual scripts. And those are guidelines for how we see ourselves as human beings, but more specifically in terms of what do we do with our sexual potential, our sexual feelings. And the important thing about this concept is that it's self-imposed. We may have drawn the ideas from literature, from films, from what our mother told us, the priest told us, but we either can accept those admonitions or examples, or we can say, no, I don't, that's not for me. I'm not going to buy that. So then that really, I think, is when those old workshops on sexual attitude recognition were really trying to get at sexual scripts in part. And we know that you start learning those really early. This is actual pre-verbal, because even with the earliest touches, what the research literature has found is that, like, mothers will hold little baby girls usually more closely than they hold little baby boys. And they hold their little baby boys a little distant, as if they recognize that there's going to be some distance between them. And the little girls are sort of enveloped and treated as an extension of the mother. And this is all pre-verbal, and the mothers are not aware of it. When you ask them, they don't necessarily say, well, of course, that's what I'm doing. These are studies about observational studies about how you fit with another human being who's either like you or not like you. And there are certainly cultural differences. In some cultures, it's fine for the caregiver to stroke a little boy's penis if he's feeling upset and cranky, as a way of soothing him. In other cultures, that would be totally forbidden, and you'd have somebody reporting you if you tried to do that. And I don't know of any culture where they do that with little girls. And we know that these start really early, naming body parts. I mean, that's part of learning who you are. And but some body parts have code names. You come to, does it call it, so that's your penis, or you call it, well, that's your wee-wee, that's your pee-pee, and we don't, or that's willy, or we don't talk about that in public. And which ones are there body parts that go unnamed at all? Many girls have no name for their clitoris. Nobody points it out to them. So see, there's your nose. It's really handy for smelling things. They don't say, oh, here's your clitoris, and it's really nice, feels good. So you learn, like, there are some parts of bodies that are different, and those are that we even call them the privates. And children have to learn what's private behavior and what things you could do in public. And I've seen this socialization going on with kids. And you say, well, you can't, I know it feels good to rub yourself, but you can do that in your room by yourself, but you can't do it out here in front of company. And so, and we learn who can touch each part of your body, who can comment on your body parts. So we're learning a lot about what it means to manage these different parts, and what is good of doing, ways of feeling, seeking pleasurable feeling, on what's shameful, what's embarrassing, what's even wicked. And the good thing about learning, we do learn a lot of that stuff, and we learn it intensively during very early childhood. And then you have to relearn and learn even more when you reach adolescence and quote, sexual maturity, when you realize, oh my God, and you really are overrun by hormones, and you have to learn, okay, what's okay in your family, in your culture, in your neighborhood, in the world at large. Most of the people don't get that far, but we can continue to relearn. And since our potential for sensual and sexual pleasure is maintained throughout life, we're still supposed to be learning in later life, okay, what does this mean now? I meant one thing when I was an adolescent. I'm not an adolescent anymore. I'm not midlife. I'm now in later life. What are the rules here? And what are the different ways of achieving pleasure? And how do those change with physical changes and the social changes? I mean, we do have a different place in society. And as we see with humor, usually older people are rendered invisible as sexual beings. I mean, there really aren't any ads where sex sells and we're the models, but there's certainly lots of young, attractive, whatever attractive is at that time, people who are used to sell and to convince people of things if they think that will make it do. But we're not it. What are the age-related changes to the sexual body? You're probably familiar with them because we're all old or older. For women, decreased estrogen is the biggest change, and that happens around menopause. And some women do estrogen replacement therapy, and that lasts for at least a while, but not forever. The decreased estrogen leads to the thinning and the atrophy of the vagina, which may lead to pain with intercourse. There's one of my references where that's really the focus, how to deal with it, what are the possible corrections. A more alkaline vagina may contribute to bacterial growth and increased uterine tract infections. Both of those make it much less pleasant to think about intercourse. Fortunately, the clitoris is still full of nerve endings, and it's not affected by decreased estrogen. Men, we know we have decreased testosterone. It mostly results in slower, less firm erections. And there are a lot of medications now that can help the hydraulics. And that's how our doctor referred to it. So there, you just have to try one and find one that might be good if that's a problem. And less forceful ejaculations, which again, compared to adolescent circle jerks, I guess that might make a difference, but probably not for most people. And an enlarged prostate is associated with more frequent urinary urges, which can be problematic. But again, you've got a penis that, whether or not it's erect or not, is still very sensitive and produces pleasurable feelings. So there's lots of ways you could do that, and that stays with you till the end. And we have our skin, and skin does change somewhat. It gets a little drier, gets sort of strange marks on it maybe, but we still feel really good when we're stroked. That is for most people. And we still desire contact. And I've heard many people say that the worst thing about getting old is that nobody wants to hug me anymore. No one touches me. I could go for weeks without being touched. And that's why I love to have little children around, because they will come and hug me and sit on my lap, and they'll kiss me, and they don't treat me as if I'm old. They still see me as a source of comfort and pleasure, not in the sexual pleasure strictly, but just the source of, that's such an important human skin hunger. And our brain actually still remembers. I mean, even when we forget some names and things, we still can remember pleasures that we've experienced. We can remember times when we were very aroused. We can get re-aroused by remembering them. We can remember intimate times we've shared. And unfortunately, we can also remember the times we were shamed, felt embarrassed, felt guilty. I mean, all those other negative feelings that have been associated with sexual behavior. But that's, as long as our brain is functioning pretty normally, that's still there. Now, the sexual pleasure, what do we do with our older bodies and souls? Well, to maximize the pleasure of this age, well, the first thing is, and today is Ageism Awareness Day. We have to overcome ageism. And that is, around us. The assumption that to be older is to be ugly, to be unsensual, to be uninterested, unable of giving or receiving pleasure. So, and as long as we are ageist ourselves, we're going to respond that way. And they've done a lot of more recent research on that. The devastating power of accepting ageism in terms of your own being. So we have to overcome it just as much as other people do. We're trying to get other people not to think of us that way, but we also have to work on our own attitudes. It's like when I was very active with OWL, the Older Women's League, I ran into a lot of women who said, I will never join an organization that says I am older. It's like, come on. you're, but I just didn't want to have anything to do with that, moving into that category, social category, because they were so terrified. And that's very unsatisfactory and unfortunate state of affairs. So what do we do? Well, self-service is always available. That's the good thing about masturbation. There are also lots of sex toys now, if you like that. There you can go to the New York Times, and they have their special section that gives advice on what to buy, and they periodically run their section on vibrators, their staff's choice of vibrators. And but you could also get vibrators now in any senior catalog under sex health or healthy aging. So they're no longer forbidden under the counter toys, but rather things that you can easily get a hold of and find out which ones work for you. And there are special stores in Chicago. I just looked them up. There's one early to bed that is especially recommended for couples and people who are kind of on the normal or usual range of sexual behavior. And there's a whole bunch of them that specialize in sadistic and masochistic behaviors and discipline, so-called discipline. But if that's what you're into, it's available in Chicago easily. There was one of the old gurus, was a grandmotherly woman, Ruth Restheimer. I'm sure you've heard of her and maybe have seen her, heard her. And she wrote a number of books about sexuality. And she really felt that sex was such an important part of existence and wellness and happiness that she wanted everybody to be happy about it and to do the right things. And so she did have some definite rules about what you should do. And she basically, if you're by yourself, if it feels good, do it, no matter what it is. And just experiment, see what happens, and be abandoned and be pleasured. Pleasure yourself. And if you have a partner, as long as your partner agrees that it's okay, if it feels good, do it. So she was apparently criticized for saying it was okay if this couple had the jar of peanut butter in their bedroom. And she said, if they want to smear each other with peanut butter and lick it off, that's fine with me. You know, it's really up to them. Maybe somebody else that wouldn't be their pleasure, but if it's theirs, then that's wonderful. They found it. And she also really tried to tell people, if you want it, ask for it. And she doesn't mean, actually, she especially doesn't mean you have to sit down and have a serious discussion about what you're doing sexually with each other, because there are a lot of other ways of conveying what you like or what you really most appreciate and what things turn you off. I mean, you can do it non-verbally, you can do it in a playful way. You don't have to make everything part of a serious discussion. And we know also, because the body changes, we do need some really good lubricants. And there's a whole lot of that's parcel of all of the sex shops that I looked at. They have a variety of lubricants that you can try. Some of them are flavored, some are not. And the only advice is to try it and see if it works for you. What it all adds up to, these changes, is that sexual intercourse, which is often considered that's the way it's done, the gold standard. Well, it's not. It's not the route to maximum pleasure for most people, particularly older people. What's been described as sexual outercourse provides the pleasures of contact, stimulation, orgasm, and that can include a lot of stroking, oral sex, oral stimulation, and we can certainly get orgasms, and you could get orgasms with a non-erect penis, and women can, of course, get orgasms as long as they let themselves. Oh, and if people don't know about these varied ways of gaining pleasure and receiving pleasure and giving pleasure, you can just sort of say it's really premature shutdown. And I remember that my father had prostate surgery when he was probably 60, and he was a man of strong desire, I know, because he would tell me about it. But it turned out that he really was very ignorant, and he just uninformed about all the different ways he could provide pleasure. And so he responded to this, the fact that he couldn't have intercourse, by not touching my mother at all. And my mother finally explained this to me and how unhappy she was, that he wouldn't hold hands with her, he wouldn't stroke her, he wouldn't embrace her, because he was so afraid that she would become aroused and want something that he couldn't provide. And when I finally understood what all the possibilities of sexuality are, I was really sorry that he didn't know that, they didn't know this, because she was very unhappy about feeling deserted in later life. And I imagine he was too, but he didn't know what to do about it. He'd been brought up on a farm, and that's what he knew, was how to do, as she said, barnyard sex. And that's unfortunate, because he could have done so much better. I'm not sure that I would have told them if I'd known, but because that's like another that's another issue. But maybe somebody else could have clued them in about the ways of dealing with his physical problems. When you look at the relationship literature regarding sexuality, desire is an issue that is a troubling issue for some individuals, and certainly for couples. I've read that the sexual therapists report that mismatched desire is probably the most common issue that they're confronted with, that somebody in the partnership wants more. And individuals can come in and say, I'm really troubled because I've lost my desire. I don't, and I miss it. It's like something that was out there and not part of me. So this can be desire. So then you have to understand, what is desire? The first is that there isn't any one right amount of desire for how much or how often or how intense the pleasure should be. I mean, it varies. Some people are almost asexual. They really don't care, and they haven't cared for a long, long time. And there are other people who are really always turned on and tuned in and really want a lot and enjoy it a lot. I mean, it's an important part of their life. So there's a lot of variability that's just natural. And you also recognize there are two kinds of desire. And often when people say, I don't have enough desire, it's this, they're thinking about the spontaneous desire that most people experience when they're adolescents and maybe young adults. As one of the women, several of the women in my study said, oh, well, yes, well, when we were first married, of course, I had hot pants. That was just assumed. But then, you know, it fades out and it's not important anymore. So that spontaneous, the romantic ideal of desire is not always present. And I love the story in the New York Times the other day about the woman who went deep sea diving for sea urchins because she read that sea urchins would restore desire. And she went sea diving and she ate a lot of sea urchins. And she said, well, she did feel a whole lot better. She didn't feel any more sexual desire, but she certainly enjoyed the trip. So I don't, there's all these supposedly foods that will do it, but I don't think it does. I think it's probably spontaneous desire is linked much more to hormones and than anything else. And it's actually testosterone, not estrogen. So, but there's another kind of desire that is the responsive desire. It's in response to somebody coming up and whom you would like and admire and stroking you or kissing you or saying something provocative, evocative. And you say, well, I think I'm open to this. I'd like to pursue this. And you can kind of, because we have good brains, we can imagine ourselves and give ourselves permission to go have some pleasure and to experience this particular kind of pleasure. And people could do that. That's really within our control, pretty much. And but you have to. It's a route. It's not an event. It's a pathway to being open to pleasure. So, if we think about sex and relationships, what are we doing about the relationships? Many people do experience new relationships in later life. And one way to do that is if you're in a long-term relationship, like I was, to revision, not only rethink, but refeel. Okay, what do I want? What do I need? What can I provide in this particular term of our relationship? And I used to say I felt like I had several marriages. It was just that they were to the same man, but we kind of did things differently as we went along, and that makes sense. And many couples in long-term relationships where the relationship remains vital do that. I mean, they don't, and women are more aware of that than the men are, but that definitely marks some of the more vital relationships. A lot of us lose a relationship or we leave a relationship, maybe because of divorce. Divorce is very common now in later life. Maybe because of death. Death is also very common. So for some people, that means they discover pleasures of singleness. And they say, wow, I can now organize my life just the way I want it to. And it's really fine. And there are other people who say, well, I've lost something. I want some love. I want some companionship. I want somebody to share life with, or TV with, or orgasms with, whatever. And there are ways of doing that. And one of the contemporary one is the online search. And I have a lot of stack of research on the risks and rewards of online dating. And I know that there are a lot of risks, but I also know that there are people who have found a really good partner this way, and that they have met somebody that they would not have run into in their ordinary path of life. And because it exposes you to a much wider network. Other ways of doing it are looking around at who's left of your friendship networks from earlier years, because people die off and the survivors can look at each other and say, oh, I've always enjoyed you. Maybe we can enjoy a different kind of relationship now. And that's been a pretty standard tactic for meeting new people and forming new relationships in later life. And there's always the stories in the Times about people who go back to their high school sweethearts and 60, 70, 80 years later, no, not 80, but certainly 60 years later, they go back and pick it up, not exactly where they left off. And other people say, well, I need some new activities, therefore That's the way I'm going to do it. Dr. Westheimer's last book was not on sex. She said, okay, I've written enough about sexual dysfunction. What I want to leave people with is my understanding that the most important thing in life is to have friends and to not be lonely, because loneliness is even worse than sexual dysfunction. And the book was published shortly after she died. And so she has like wise words on how to feel more connected. And as she said, be a turtle, stick your neck out, take risks, invite people over, invite people into your home, into your space. Don't count, don't wait to be invited back, because most people are very slow about inviting people. But if you want to be connected, you better take the lead and do it. And make sure that you speak to everybody, not just the people whom you screen out. Don't screen out most people and therefore miss some very interesting and potentially compatible connections. So she had a really good idea. And we know that in this, there are gender differences. Women are generally more socially connected, and they're less distraught when they lose one connection. Men are more reliant on their wife or their partner. Now, it's actually time, I think I'm not going to talk about these. The other concerns about sexuality in later life. There is increase in sexual diseases, and we should be doing something about it. And the other issue, which is really something for another time maybe, is what do you do about sexual expression in congregate living settings? And that's a minority of elders, for sure, but for those, it's very important. And it's a matter of great concern for people who run nursing homes and their families and people who have to live in them and so forth. So there are some real issues. Then I do have some references. These are highly selected. It's not referencing everything that I went into my thinking. But there are definitely interesting things that might be useful for you. And I've just listed some of them you could get a hold of. And then we can go to questions.
Well, Margaret, I just wanted to tell you that I thought that was really a wonderful talk. And it's a talk that's very useful for us to hear and to be able to approach things in a new way.
Thank you, Eva. I recognize your voice.
Oh, good. Yeah, I just realized my video was off. Okay. Sorry.
Yes.
Here it is.
Yeah. Rita, this is Dinah Grace. I consider myself to be pretty liberal and open and educated, but talking about sex doesn't come easily.
No, it doesn't. And
even
we are
listening to you.
when that we didn't do that. I mean,
Yeah, right. But so thank you for opening the topic that I think more older adults need to pay. Life doesn't end at 65, right?
No.
My husband's 96. He's not ready to stop living.
no.
And we're going to be living older. And so we need to get over some of our uncomfortableness
Yes.
in talking about these issues. So thank you for opening it up. I hope to have more.
You're very welcome. Happy to do it anytime. Happy to talk to anybody. There's Vivian, our who provides the humor. So
thank you, Margaret, I'm glad I came. It's very enlightening. And it made me think a lot about how open I was with my daughter when she was an adolescent. And she said, "What's wrong with you, mother? Why do you want to talk about sex all the time?" And I said, well, Oprah told us that it's important to have this discussion. So it's interesting how I'm very different from my daughter. Even she's an adult now, but here I am in my fourth quarter. And as you heard, I tell dirty jokes at the senior Zoom meeting. and I have a big file of jokes to tell. And it's wonderful. But I divorced, and I'm looking for a partner. I would like to find a friend.
Mhm.
And the other day I went to Rush for an appointment, and this man held the elevator for me. I use a cane for my balance issue. So he had a cane also, and he held the door open for me, and I said, "Oh, thank you so much." So he got in the elevator and he said, I said, "I really appreciate that because I'm slow." So he said, "I'm dehydrated." And in my comedic mind, I wanted to say, "What's your last name?" But then I said, "Well, drink some water." He said, "Oh, I'm on a water pill." So I said, when I got to my floor, I said, "Is that the way one flirts as we get older?"
Oh, it's got to be some way.
Oh,
Yeah, so I appreciate this, and I will, Margaret, you're fabulous. You are really wonderful. It was a great lecture. Mhm.
Yeah, we have some very good discussions about sex in our support group, which is one reason why I thought that, okay, this will go. Because we've had some very intense discussions about that, as well as lots of other things.
I'd like to say something. Again, Margaret, this was just such a valuable, wonderful, warm, loving talk that you gave. But you alluded to it in certain places, especially when you mentioned the brain and the importance in relationships. And I'm not only talking about sexual relationships and partner relationships, but with friends, people our age, is the importance and strength of speech and telling people how much you care about them and hugging them and I think we all can use this in this time of loneliness, and even the Surgeon General, Dr. Murthy, talks about this time. And I also want just a little thing is I learned something in a short relationship I had with Dr. Ruth. And
Oh, right.
yes, and Dr. Ruth, I met her at a choral festival, believe it or not, in the Catskills. And her warmth and loving kindness, and the very fact that the minute she meets you and she likes you, she hugs you. And the communication that she has immediately with her really strikes up an important lesson that I learned very early, because this was at least 20 years ago. And so the warmth of one's speech is just as important almost as touch or any sexual relationship with not only your partner, but with everybody you possibly can be. Even on the street, when you walk down the street and you see somebody and, they're somewhere else while they're walking down the street, and you say, "That's a beautiful blouse you have on. You made their day." And this pleasure is very, very important. That comes
Sometimes it's received well, and then other times, because the other day I was at Kimball Plaza, and I saw two other ladies with canes and one with a walker. And I said, "Oh, we're sisters, cane sisters." And I got the response like, "Are you crazy?" And I was being friendly. So it goes over sometimes, and sometimes it just doesn't. But I am who I am, and that's how I will continue to be. Yeah.
Well,
Can I add a comment?
sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I was unmute. I was on mute before, so I didn't know if I could interrupt, but now I can.
Yes,
When my husband passed away, I discovered online Joan Price commentary on sexuality and aging, and found it very useful and very reminiscent of what you're talking about. But it does reach a very large audience, and that's important because, as you pointed out, discussion is necessary and sex education for elders is necessary.
Mhm.
But is this a person you're familiar with? Have you noticed her?
no, I'm not.
I can pass that.
Good. No, I'd certainly like to look her up.
The other thing you commented on was the lack of education amongst doctors. I've been going to doctors for all these 84 years, and none of them have initiated the subject of sex or how I'm feeling about losing my husband or anything. And I did initiate conversation with one doctor who told me how unusual it was for a patient to say anything. So educating doctors is a huge need, and I hope you are able to continue doing that.
Well, that program did not survive, unfortunately. The program at Northwestern ran for several, maybe 3 or 4 years, and it was really interesting. And then they dropped.
Almost done.
Margaret, I have a story about my gynecologist that I had when I was living in New York. And when I went on hormone replacement therapy. And he said to me, you're divorced, and may I suggest that you get a vibrator? And he was well versed in sexuality. I went to some of his lectures, and in his lectures, he mentioned the fact that the human body craves orgasm into their 90s. Unfortunately, Dr. Maurice Cohn is no longer on the earth, but he was an exceptional person.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yep. But I agree with you, they do need to be educated about sexuality and willing to discuss it with patients.
I just want to acknowledge that we are over time, and that's perfectly fine. People can keep asking, but others shouldn't feel a problem if they want to leave, if they've respected the time. So